Morning light crept into the cave, and Yuna woke to find the predators already stirring from their rest. She had slept lightly with one part of her mind always listening for danger, a human ability that her ancestors had developed when sleeping. On open savannas surrounded by creatures that hunted at night, the team gathered their meager supplies and prepared for the journey back to the shuttle. Talani stood immediately wobbled on unsteady legs. The night in the cold cave had worsened her condition despite Yuna's improvised insulation. "Let me examine you," Yuna said. She inspected the crystalline joints and found what she feared. Stress fractures spreading through Talani's structure like cracks in thin ice. "How bad is it?" Talani asked, already knowing from Yuna's expression. "Bad enough that you cannot walk to the shuttle. The vibration will accelerate the fractures, and you could shatter before we cover half the distance. Then leave me here and send help after you reach the shuttle," Talani suggested with forced calm. "The shuttle will not be accessible for another 4 hours until the electromagnetic lockdown clears." Instructor Valith interjected, "And rescue teams would need additional hours to deploy. I will not survive that long," Talani said quietly. Yuna stood and walked to the cave entrance where pale sunlight filtered through dispersing clouds. She calculated distances and times and possibilities. While her team watched her with a mixture of hope and despair, "I can run to the shuttle," she announced. "That is 9 kilometers through terrain we barely survived last night." Sorvith objected. "At night in a storm, while leading 4 people who could not read the land or predict the weather, alone in daylight I can move much faster. No single being could cover that distance quickly enough to matter," Breck said. Yuna turned to face them with an expression they had never seen before. It was the look of a predator preparing to hunt. "Humans are persistence hunters," she said. "Our ancestors chased prey across open plains until the prey collapsed from exhaustion because no other creature on Earth could match our endurance. We sweat through our skin to regulate temperature. We have tendons designed for energy-efficient running. And we have mental stubbornness that lets us push through pain that would stop any other species." "You are saying you can outrun any creature on your planet?" Sorvith asked with disbelief. "I am saying we can outlast any creature on our planet. We do not need to be faster because we never stop. We keep running until our prey gives up and dies." She pulled off her heavy outer gear and stretched her muscles with practiced efficiency. "Stay here with Talani and keep her warm and do not provoke the predators. I will reach the shuttle and override the lockdown protocols manually and fly back to collect you." "You know how to fly the shuttle?" Instructor Valith asked. "I have been watching the pilots on every academy mission for 8 months. I learn quickly when I am motivated." She did not wait for further objections. She ran. The forest blurred around her as Yuna settled into the rhythm that her species had perfected over millions of years. Her feet found solid ground without conscious thought. Her breathing fell into patterns that maximized oxygen intake. Her heart pumped blood enriched by lungs, evolved to process thin mountain air. She was not fast by the standards of pure speed, but she was inexhaustible by the standards of almost every other living thing. 1 kilometer passed and her muscles warmed. 2 kilometers passed and she hit her stride. 3 kilometers passed and she felt the runner's high that humans experienced when their bodies release chemicals designed to reward persistence. She leaped over fallen trees and splashed through streams and dodged unstable ground without slowing. Every obstacle that had threatened her team last night became just another part of the path she needed to run. 4 kilometers and her lungs burned with the slightly wrong atmosphere. 5 kilometers and her legs screamed with accumulated fatigue. 6 kilometers and her mind went quiet and clear and focused on nothing but the next step forward. This was what humans did. They endured. They pushed through barriers that other species accepted as limits. They refused to stop even when stopping seemed like the only sensible option. 7 kilometers and she could see The clearing where the shuttle waited 8 kilometers, and she was sprinting across open ground with the last reserves of strength her body could provide 9 kilometers, and she reached the shuttle door and slammed her palm against the manual. Override panel. The systems came online slowly as the electromagnetic lockdown protocols disengaged. Yuna climbed into the pilot's seat and activated the controls with hands that trembled from exhaustion but moved with certainty born of months of careful observation. The shuttle rose from the clearing and turned toward the cave system inside the cave. Sorvith watched the sky through the entrance. With desperate hope, Talani lay cradled in Breck's massive arms, her crystalline body making sounds like breaking glass as the stress fractures spread. Instructor Valeth stood guard with the survey sidearm raised toward the predators, who were growing restless at the strange sounds their guests were making. A shadow passed over the cave entrance, and the roar of shuttle engines filled the chamber. The predators scattered into the depths of the cave system, and the team emerged into morning light to find Yuna standing at the shuttle door with a smile on her exhausted face. "Medical bay is ready," she said. "Get her inside." Breck carried Talani up the ramp, and Instructor Valeth followed with Sorvith close behind. Yuna sealed the door and lifted off before everyone was properly seated, because Talani's life depended on reaching proper medical facilities within the hour. The shuttle screamed through the atmosphere toward the orbital station above. They made it with 12 minutes to spare. Talani was rushed to the medical wing, where crystalline repair specialists stabilized her fractures and began the slow process of molecular reconstruction. The rest of the team sat in the waiting area and processed everything that had happened. Instructor Valeth excused herself and went to submit her assessment report. Sorvith turned to Yuna and struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "You saved all of our lives," he finally said, "and we spent 8 months treating you as worthless." "Yes," Yuna agreed without softening the truth. "I do not know how to apologize for that. You do not need to apologize to me. You need to change how you treat the next human who comes to this academy, and the species after that, and the one after that. Every time you meet someone different, you have a choice to dismiss them or to learn from them. I hope you make better choices from now on." Breck nodded slowly, and Sorvith clicked his mandibles. In what Yuna now recognized as acceptance, Instructor Valeth returned with an expression of barely contained excitement. "I have submitted my report," she announced. "I have recommended a complete revision of Academy curriculum to properly account for Deathworld species capabilities, and I have recommended Yuna Park for advanced placement in the planetary survival specialization." Yuna blinked in surprise. "I have also requested that you serve as my teaching assistant next semester." Valeth continued. "The Academy needs to learn what humans can teach us, and I believe you are the one to show them." For a long moment, Yuna said nothing. Then she smiled with genuine warmth for the first time since arriving at the station 8 months ago. "I would like that," she said. In the medical wing, Talani's crystalline body slowly healed. In the waiting room, a team that had entered the wilderness as strangers emerged as something closer to friends. And in the heart of a young human woman who had spent 8 months in silence, something new began to grow. Not anger anymore, not resignation, but hope. The quiet student had spoken at last, and the galaxy had finally listened. Sometimes that was how change began. Not with declarations or demands, but with one person refusing to give up. One person running when walking would have been easier. One person proving that the measure of worth had nothing to do with what others believed, and everything to do with what you were willing to do when the test began. Yuna Park looked out at the stars beyond the station viewport and thought about home. She thought about her grandfather who taught her to read the weather and her parents who believed in her. When no one else did, she thought about all the humans who would come after her to this academy and all the doors she had opened by refusing to stay silent. The test was over. The real journey was just beginning. The cave mouth yawned before them like the entrance to another world, and Yuna led her team inside with careful, measured steps. The smell hit her immediately. A thick animal musk that spoke of large predators and recent kills, and territory fiercely defended behind her. She heard Telani gasp and Sorvith's mandibles click in alarm. "Stay calm," Yuna whispered. "They already know we are here. Running will trigger their chase instinct." The cave opened into a larger chamber, and as Yuna's eyes adjusted to the darkness, she saw them. 6 creatures lay scattered across the stone floor, each one the size of a ground transport vehicle with sleek bodies covered in scales that shimmered with bioluminescent patterns. Their heads turned toward the intruders, and 6 pairs of eyes began glowing. With the cold light of predatory attention, Sorvith's hand moved toward his survey sidearm, a small weapon designed for sample collection rather than combat. Yuna caught his wrist with a grip that surprised him with its strength. "Do not," she said quietly but with absolute authority. "They will kill us." Sorvith hissed. "Not if we show them we are not threats and not prey. Fighting will guarantee our deaths. I'm offering us a chance to live." She released his wrist and stepped forward alone. The largest creature raised its massive head and opened a mouth filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. Bioluminescent patterns pulsed across its body in what Yuna recognized as a threat. Display meant to establish dominance. Yuna stopped walking and stood absolutely still. She kept her body relaxed, her shoulders down, her hands visible at her sides. She met the creature's glowing eyes with direct contact and held that gaze without blinking. The creature rose to its full height, and Yuna realized it was even larger than she had estimated, easily capable of killing all 5 of them before any could reach the cave entrance. It moved toward her with fluid predatory grace and stopped close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from its body and smell the blood on its breath. Yuna continued, holding eye contact. The creature snorted a blast of warm air into her face, and she did not flinch. It circled her slowly, examining this strange small being that had entered its territory without fear. Yuna turned her head to follow its movement but kept her body facing forward, showing she was aware of its position without assuming an aggressive stance. The creature completed its circle and stood before her again. Yuna slowly, deliberately, looked away and down, not submission exactly, but acknowledgement of the creature's dominance in this space, a willingness to coexist rather than challenge. The creature's bioluminescent pattern shifted from aggressive pulsing to a steadier glow. It made a low rumbling sound that vibrated through Yuna's chest and then turned and walked back to its resting place among the others. Yuna exhaled slowly and gestured for her team to follow her toward a side chamber away from the main nest. They moved in terrified silence until they reached a small alcove far enough from the predators to allow whispered conversation. "What just happened?" Telani asked with her crystalline voice trembling. "Negotiation," Yuna said simply. "You negotiated with an animal," Sorvith demanded with disbelief. "Humans have been negotiating with predators for millions of years. We evolved alongside creatures that could kill us easily, and we survived by learning to read their body language and communicate our intentions without words." She sat down on the cave floor and gestured for the others to do the same. "Those creatures are apex predators, which means they have no natural enemies on this world. They do not need to hunt everything that moves because they can afford to be selective about their prey. I showed them that we are not worth the effort of killing." "How could you possibly know their body language?" Instructor Valitha asked with the fascination of a scientist encountering something unprecedented. "All predator species share certain fundamental behaviors because predation follows certain rules, regardless of planet. The threat display to establish dominance. the circling to assess prey, the decision point where they choose to attack or withdraw. I've seen those patterns in wolves and bears and big cats on Earth. The specific movements vary, but the underlying logic remains the same. Breck settled his massive bulk against the cave wall and studied. Yuna with new eyes. On my world, we do not have predators like this, he said. Our dangerous creatures are small, venomous things that hide in dark places. We never developed the instincts you describe. Most civilized species evolved on worlds where they did not face constant predation pressure, Yuna explained. Their ancestors either eliminated their predators early or evolved in ecological niches where predation was minimal. Humans took a different path. What path? Talani asked. We lived among the predators. We hunted the same prey, and sometimes we were prey ourselves. And over millions of years, we developed the ability to understand them in ways that go beyond conscious thought. When I look at a predator, I see patterns and possibilities that feel like instinct, but are actually the accumulated wisdom of 1,000 generations. The storm continued raging outside and the predators in the main chamber settled into rest while maintaining occasional watchful glances toward the strangers in their territory. Sorvith sat in silence for a long time before speaking. I was wrong about humans, he said finally. I thought you were primitive newcomers who had nothing to offer the Concord. I see now that your primitiveness is actually a different kind of advancement. We call it being from a Deathworld, Yuna said without bitterness. Earth is classified as hostile to most galactic species. Our gravity is crushing. Our weather is violent. Our ecosystem is filled with creatures designed to kill. And we thrived there for millions of years before we ever reached for the stars. Why did you never tell us any of this? Talani asked. You have been silent for 8 months while we treated you as inferior. Yuna looked at her with an expression that held no anger but carried the weight of accumulated disappointment. I did tell you. On my first day at the academy, I tried to share what humans could offer. I raised my hand in class and asked questions and volunteered for group projects and offered to explain how Earth's survival techniques might benefit interspecies cooperation. No one listened. After the first month, I stopped trying because speaking only earned me more contempt. Silence fell among the group, and Yuna saw shame on faces that had never directed anything but dismissal toward her. We did not listen. Instructor Valith admitted, the Academy teaches that humans are a primitive species recently emerged from their home system. We assumed that meant you had nothing to teach us. Every species has something to teach, Yuna said. The Morath understand crystal harmonics in ways no other species can replicate. The Vreth have mathematical capabilities that exceed our finest computers. The Gorvons have social bonding instincts that create communities stronger than any human city. And humans have survival instincts refined by millions of years of living on a world that tried to kill us every single day. What do we do now? Breck asked. Yuna looked toward the cave entrance, where rain still poured and lightning still flashed. We wait for the storm to pass. We stay calm and quiet and do not provoke our hosts. And when morning comes, we make our way back to the shuttle. That's simple. Sorvith asked. Survival is usually simple, Yuna said. The hard part is staying calm enough to do the simple things correctly. They settled into uncomfortable rest on the cold stone floor, while the predators watched them with cautious tolerance. Sometime during the long night, Yuna noticed that Telani's joint wraps were loosening, and the crystalline alien was shivering with temperature. Stress. She moved closer and adjusted the insulation without being asked, and Talani looked at her with eyes that glistened in the bioluminescent glow. Thank you, Talani said quietly. You are welcome. Yuna replied. Dawn came slowly as the storm faded to gentle rain and then to gray morning light filtering through the cave entrance. Yuna checked on her team and found everyone alive, though exhausted and frightened, but they were alive. That was what mattered. That was what humans did. They survived. Rain hammered against Yuna's body as she led her team through the forest, and she counted every heartbeat between lightning flashes while calculating the safest path forward. The others struggled behind her, their bodies designed for gentler worlds, where weather meant mild inconvenience rather than deadly force. Yuna moved with the confidence of 10,000 generations of human survival instinct, and her ancestors walked with her. In every step, stay away from the tall trees. She called back to her team. Lightning seeks the highest points. Sorvith stumbled over a root hidden beneath the rushing water, and Brett caught him before he fell. How can you see anything in this darkness? The Vreth demanded with frustration, and fear mixing in his clicking voice. I am not seeing. Yuna explained while scanning the terrain ahead. I am feeling the ground through my feet, and listening to how the rain sounds on different surfaces and watching the patterns of where water flows and where it pools. That is impossible, Talani argued while clutching her crystalline arms against her body to protect her joints from the moisture. It is not impossible for a human, Instructor Valith said quietly, and her luminescent patches flickered with what Yuna now recognized as the beginning of understanding. They had traveled half a kilometer when Yuna stopped suddenly and held up her hand. Do not move, she ordered. The team froze behind her. Yuna studied the ground ahead, where the vegetation changed color subtly and the surface appeared solid, but her instincts screamed danger. She picked up a heavy branch from the forest floor and threw it onto the suspicious patch of ground. The branch sank immediately into mud that swallowed it completely within seconds. Sinkhole, Yuna announced. The rain has destabilized the soil. We go around to the left where the rocks provide stable footing. Sorvith stared at the place where the branch had disappeared, and his compound eyes widened with the realization of how close he had come to walking into that trap. How did you know? He asked. The vegetation grows differently over unstable ground because the roots cannot anchor properly, and the color changes slightly because different minerals rise to the surface, and the way water flows around the area tells you the density of the soil underneath. They taught you this at human schools? Talani asked with genuine curiosity breaking through her usual disdain. My grandfather taught me when I was 7 years old, Yuna replied. Before we were allowed to hike the mountains alone, we had to prove we could read the land well enough to survive. She resumed walking, and the team followed with new respect in their silence. Lightning split a tree 30 meters to their right, and the explosion of superheated wood and steam made everyone except Yuna flinch. 3 more strikes in this cluster, she said calmly. Then we will have approximately 2 minutes before the next cluster begins. That is when we cross the open ground ahead. True to her prediction, the lightning came 3 more times in rapid succession and then paused. Now, Yuna commanded, run. The team sprinted across 50 meters of open terrain while Yuna counted seconds in her head and calculated the approaching danger. They reached the cover of a rock formation just as the sky lit up again with renewed electrical fury. How did you know exactly how many strikes there would be? Breck asked while catching his breath with great heaving gasps. The electrical charge in the atmosphere builds and releases in patterns, Yuna explained. You can feel the pressure change if you pay attention, and you can predict when the buildup reaches release threshold by counting the intervals between previous discharges. Human senses can detect atmospheric electrical charge. Instructor Valith asked with academic fascination, overriding her fear. We feel it as headaches and joint pain and a tingling sensation on our skin. It is why many humans claim they can predict storms, because they actually can. They pressed forward and the rain continued falling, and the wind screamed through the forest canopy. Talani began falling behind as her crystalline body struggled with the temperature fluctuations. Morath biology required stable temperatures to maintain the molecular bonds that held their bodies together, and this storm was pushing her toward critical stress levels. Yuna noticed immediately and stopped the group. "Her joints are degrading," she announced while examining Talani with clinical concern. "I am fine," Talani insisted even as her crystalline fingers trembled visibly. "You are not fine, and pretending otherwise will kill you before we reach the caves." Yuna pulled off her outer jacket and began tearing it into strips while her teammates watched in confusion. "What are you doing to your clothing?" Sorvith asked. "Creating insulation for her joints." Yuna worked quickly with hands that knew exactly what to do because she had treated frostbite victims on mountain rescue missions back on Earth. She gathered leaves from nearby plants and tested their texture against her cheek. "These have a waxy coating that repels water and traps heat," she explained while wrapping them around Talani's joints and binding them in place with strips of fabric. The crystalline alien stared at her with an expression Yuna had never seen directed at her before. It looked almost like gratitude. "Why are you helping me?" Talani asked quietly. "I have been cruel to you since the day you arrived." Yuna finished securing the last joint wrap and met Talani's eyes with steady calm. "Because we are on the same team, and I do not let teammates die if I can prevent it. Even teammates who treated you as worthless. My value does not depend on whether you recognize it. And your life does not depend on whether you deserve saving. You are alive and in danger, and I can help. So I help." She turned and resumed leading the way before Talani could respond. Breck moved closer to Yuna as they walked and lowered his massive head to speak quietly. "You are not what we thought you were," he said. "I am exactly what I have always been," Yuna replied. "You simply never bothered to look." They traveled another kilometer through terrain that would have killed any of them alone, but which Yuna navigated with the certainty of someone. Walking through her own home, she found firm ground where others saw only mud. She predicted lightning strikes with accuracy that seemed supernatural. She identified shelter opportunities and water hazards and safe crossing points with senses her teammates could not comprehend. The rain began to ease slightly as they approached the final stretch before the cave system. Yuna stopped and held up her hand again, and this time her stillness carried a different quality. "What is it?" Sorvith asked. Yuna stood absolutely motionless with her head tilted slightly and her eyes half closed. "The caves," she said finally. "They are not empty." "What do you mean?" Instructor Valith asked. "I can smell something on the air, something large and alive. And I can feel warmth coming from the cave entrance that does not match the ambient temperature. And the pattern of raindrops sounds different near the opening, like something is disturbing the airflow from inside. The survey data said the apex predators on this world are solitary," Sorvith argued. The survey data did not account for severe storm conditions driving multiple predators to seek the same shelter simultaneously. She looked at her team and saw fear on every face, except Breck, who simply looked resigned. "We have two choices," Yuna said. "We can stay out here in a storm that will kill Talani within hours and possibly kill the rest of you. Or we can enter those caves and deal with whatever waits inside." "You say that as if dealing with apex predators is a reasonable option," Talani said. Yuna smiled for the first time since landing on this planet. "My species did not become the dominant life form on Earth by avoiding predators," she said. "We became dominant by learning how to live among them." She walked toward the cave entrance and her team followed because they had no other choice, and because somehow they had begun to believe that this small, quiet human might actually know what she was doing. The shuttle descended through gray clouds, and Yuna watched the forests of Kethrin 4 rise to meet them through the viewport while her teammates chattered about survey procedures and sample collection quotas. Sorvith stood at the front of the passenger compartment and reviewed their mission objectives one final time, his mandibles clicking with the precise rhythm of someone who had memorized every Academy protocol and intended to follow them exactly. Talani adjusted her crystalline sensors with delicate movements of her translucent fingers, and ignored Yuna. Completely, Breck checked the equipment cases with methodical care and offered Yuna a small nod when their eyes met. Instructor Valeth observed everything with the detached interest of someone who had supervised hundreds of these missions and expected nothing unusual from this one. The shuttle landed in a clearing surrounded by towering trees with bark, the color of rust, and leaves that shifted between blue and purple as the wind moved through them. Yuna stepped onto alien soil and felt the familiar sensation of wrongness that came from breathing air slightly different from Earth's composition. Her lungs would adapt within hours because human bodies were remarkably good at adapting to almost anything. Park. Collect the sample containers from storage compartment 3 and follow the team, Sorvith ordered without looking at her. Understood. Yuna replied. She gathered the heavy containers and followed her teammates into the forest while cataloging every detail her human senses could detect. The air pressure felt lower than the survey data had predicted. The local wildlife had gone quiet in a way that reminded her of summer afternoons before thunderstorms in the mountains of Korea. The quality of light filtering through the canopy had a particular yellow tinge that her grandfather would have recognized. Immediately, the storm was coming faster than she had calculated. Yuna said nothing and continued walking. The first 6 hours proceeded according to Sorvith's careful schedule, and the team collected soil samples and vegetation specimens and recordings of local animal calls with efficient coordination that excluded Yuna from every meaningful task. She carried containers and stayed silent and watched the sky through gaps in the forest canopy. The clouds were thickening and moving in patterns that made her head ache with the pressure change. Talani paused her sensor sweep and tilted her crystalline head with confusion. The atmospheric readings are fluctuating beyond expected parameters. She reported to Sorvith. Sensor malfunction, perhaps? Sorvith suggested with a dismissive click. My equipment is functioning perfectly. Talani replied with sharp defensiveness. Instructor Valeth checked her own instruments and frowned, the luminescent patches on her skull flickering with uncertainty. The readings are unusual, but not dangerous according to Academy classifications, she announced. We will continue the survey as planned. Yuna shifted the weight of the sample containers on her back and felt the first gust of wind strong enough to make the tree branches sway and groan. The birds had stopped singing 20 minutes ago. The insects had vanished from the air 10 minutes ago. The forest floor animals had retreated to their burrows 5 minutes ago. Every survival instinct her species had developed over millions of years was screaming at her to find shelter. Immediately, perhaps we should return to the shuttle, Breck suggested with a rumble of concern in his deep voice. We have barely completed 30% of our survey objectives, Sorvith objected. The Academy will not accept incomplete data as an excuse for early termination. The argument continued, and Yuna counted the seconds between wind gusts while calculating the distance to their shuttle. They were 4 kilometers from the landing site and moving in the wrong direction. The storm would arrive within the hour. A flash of light split the sky above the canopy and thunder followed 3 seconds later. Close enough that Talani flinched and her crystalline body chimed with vibration. That was unexpected, Instructor Valeth admitted with poorly hidden concern. The next lightning strike came 8 seconds later, and the one after that came 5 seconds later, and then the sky opened and rain fell with the force of a waterfall. Yuna had experienced monsoons on Earth, and this was worse. The team scrambled for cover beneath a massive fallen tree, while water poured down around them in sheets so thick they could barely see each other. Sorvith tried to activate his communication device and produced only static and sparking failures. The electromagnetic interference is disrupting all electronic systems, Talani reported with something close to panic in her crystalline voice. The shuttle will be in protective lockdown, Instructor Valeth realized aloud. Standard protocol during severe electromagnetic events prevents remote activation. How long until extraction? Breck asked. 30 hours. Valeth answered. Lightning struck a tree 50 meters away, and the explosion of bark and flame made everyone except Una scream in surprise. She had been counting the intervals and knew that strike was coming. The rain intensified until their makeshift shelter began flooding, and the temperature dropped rapidly as the storm drew heat from the air. Talani began making sounds of distress as moisture seeped into the joints of her crystalline body. We cannot stay here, Sorvith announced with frantic energy. We need better shelter. The survey data mentioned the cave system 3 kilometers northeast. Breck offered. 3 kilometers in this weather could kill us, Talani argued. The team fell into chaos as everyone spoke at once and offered conflicting suggestions and grew increasingly afraid. Una watched them and felt the strange calm that always came over her in emergencies. Her grandfather had called it the quiet mind, the state where fear became fuel and panic became purpose. She had climbed mountains in blizzards and crossed rivers in flood season and survived a car accident that should have killed her when she was 16 years old. This storm was dangerous, but it was not beyond her. I know the way, Una said. Her voice was not loud, but somehow it cut through the noise and made everyone turn to look at her. What did you say? Sorvith demanded. I have been watching the storm pattern since we landed, and I know how to read the intervals between lightning clusters, and I know which terrain will be stable and which will flood, and I know the path to the caves that will keep us alive. Silence fell among her teammates, except for the roar of rain and thunder around them. How could you possibly know any of that? Sorvith asked with disbelief, and something that might have been hope. Una looked at him and felt 8 months of silence pressing against her chest, like a weight she was finally ready to release. Because my world taught me to survive worse than this, she said. Earth is storms that span entire continents, and earthquakes that reshape coastlines, and seasons that kill millions of unprepared creatures every year. And my people learned to read the weather before we learned to build cities. And that knowledge never left us. She stepped out from beneath the fallen tree and let the rain hammer against her body, while her teammates watched in amazement. Follow me or stay here, she told them. But I'm going to the caves, and I'm going to survive, and anyone who comes with me will survive too. Breck was the first to move, his massive form rising to follow the small human into the storm. Instructor Valeth came next with her luminescent patches flickering in what Una now recognized as uncertainty, mixed with respect. Talani had no choice but to follow because staying alone meant certain death. Sorvith came last with his pride, cracking under the weight of circumstances beyond his training. The quiet student led her team into the storm and showed them what a human could do. Una Park sat alone at the back of the lecture hall and watched her classmates ignore her existence for the 437th time. She had counted every single instance since arriving at the Galactic Academy of Xenobiological Sciences 8 months ago, and she had stopped feeling hurt around instance 212. The Academy floated in orbit around Verimuth Prime, a gleaming station of silver and crystal that housed the brightest young minds from across the concord of aligned species. And Una was the first human ever permitted to study within its prestigious halls. They had accepted her as a political gesture when humanity joined the Concord 3 years ago. And everyone knew it, and everyone made sure she knew they knew it. Instructor Marvelous, a tall being with 4 arms and skin like polished obsidian, gestured toward the holographic display at the front of the room and continued his lecture on planetary survey protocols. Una took notes, even though no one would ever ask to compare them with hers. A Vreth student named Sorvith sat 3 rows ahead, his insectoid body rigid with attention as he recorded every word the instructor spoke. And beside him a crystalline Morith named Talani sparkled under the artificial lights while whispering comments to her neighbor about the primitive human. contaminating their learning environment. Yuna heard every word because human ears were better than Talani realized. She said nothing because she had learned that speaking only made things worse. The lecture ended and students filed out in clusters of conversation and shared purpose. And Yuna gathered her materials slowly to avoid the awkward shuffle of bodies that always seemed to push her aside. Without apology, a massive shadow fell across her desk, and she looked up to find Breck standing there, his Gorvan bulk nearly blocking out the light. And his 4 eyes blinked at her with something that might have been kindness. The announcement board says teams for the final examination will be posted tomorrow, he said in his deep rumbling voice. Thank you for telling me. Yuna replied. Breck nodded once and walked away. And that was the most pleasant interaction she had experienced all week. She appreciated him for it, even though she suspected he only spoke to her because Gorvans were culturally obligated to acknowledge everyone in their proximity the next morning. Yuna stood before the announcement board and felt her stomach tighten as she read the team assignments. Team 7 consisted of Sorvith as designated leader, Talani as communication specialist, Breck as equipment handler, Unipark as general support, and Instructor Valith as their supervising evaluator. General support meant carrying things and staying out of the way. Yuna had expected nothing more. Sorvith clicked his mandibles in obvious displeasure when he saw her name on his team roster. And Talani made a sound like breaking glass that Yuna had learned was the Morath expression of disgust. Only, Breck offered her a polite greeting when they gathered for their first team. Meeting Instructor Valith was an elderly Selenari with luminescent patches on her elongated skull that flickered in patterns Yuna could not read. And she looked at the human with the tired patience of someone assigned an unpleasant duty. The final examination will take place on Kethrin 4. Valith announced to the assembled team, a Class 7 world with moderate hazards including unstable terrain, aggressive fauna, and toxic atmospheric pockets in the lowland regions. She activated a holographic projection of the planet, a world of dense forests and jagged mountains, beneath a sky of perpetual gray clouds. You will conduct a 48-hour survey mission, collecting samples and documenting local ecosystems according to standard Academy protocols. And you will be evaluated on teamwork and individual competence and adherence to safety procedures. Sorvith immediately began assigning roles and responsibilities, and his compound eyes never once glanced in Yuna's direction as he planned their mission strategy. Talani volunteered to manage their sensor equipment with barely concealed pride in her technical abilities. Breck accepted the physical labor tasks. Without complaint, Yuna received the job of carrying sample containers and backup supplies. Do you have any questions about your role? Sorvith asked her, though his tone suggested he expected nothing useful from her answer. No questions, Yuna said. She had many questions, but none that this team would hear. That evening, Yuna sat alone in her quarters and studied the survey data for Kethrin 4 with the careful attention her instructors would never know she possessed. The Academy had classified the planet as moderate hazard based on sensor readings and previous survey reports. And for most species in the Concord, that assessment was probably accurate. For a human, the classification was almost laughable. Yuna had grown up in a region of Earth called Korea, in a city that experienced monsoons and earthquakes and winters cold enough to kill the unprepared. And she had spent childhood summers hiking through mountains, where her grandfather taught her to read the weather by watching the behavior of birds and the movement of clouds. Kethrin 4 looked dangerous to aliens who evolved on gentle worlds with stable climates and predictable seasons. To Yuna, it looked like a camping trip, but something in the data caught her attention and made her sit forward with narrowed eyes. The atmospheric readings showed patterns she recognized from her grandfather's teachings. Pressure fluctuations and humidity shifts that preceded major storm events on Earth. The survey data covered only 2 previous expeditions to Kethrin 4, both during what appeared to be calm seasons, and neither report mentioned the possibility of severe weather cycles. Yuna cross-referenced the planetary rotation data with the atmospheric patterns and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. They were arriving at the beginning of something big. She considered reporting her concerns to Sorvith or Instructor Valeth, and imagined the dismissive clicks and flickering lights that would greet her warnings. The primitive human thinks she knows better than Academy censors. They would say, the creature from the Deathworld is confused by proper scientific equipment. They would laugh. Yuna closed the data files and made her decision. She would prepare herself for what was coming, and she would say nothing to her team. Let them learn what it meant to underestimate a human. Let them discover that the quiet student had been paying attention all along. The night before departure, Yuna packed her personal gear with items not on the official equipment list. A compact emergency blanket made of materials her grandmother had given her, water purification tablets from Earth, a small knife with a blade that folded into its handle, and protein bars dense enough to sustain her through extended physical exertion. She packed these things at the bottom of her bag, where no one would think to look, because no one ever looked at anything she did. She thought about her family back on Earth, about her mother who had cried with pride when Yuna received the Academy acceptance, about her father who had worried about his daughter alone among aliens who saw humans as primitive newcomers, about her grandfather who had simply nodded and told her to remember everything he taught her. The mountain does not care if you are proud or humble, he had said in his quiet way. It only cares if you are prepared. Yuna was prepared. She lay in her bunk and listened to the hum of the station around her, and felt the familiar calm that came before difficult things tomorrow she would walk onto. A world that her teammates considered challenging, and that she considered familiar. Tomorrow she would carry their sample containers and stay silent and watch them struggle with an environment that her ancestors would have conquered 10,000 years ago. And when the storm came, as she knew it would show them what a human could do. She closed her eyes and slept a deep dreamless sleep of someone ready for whatever morning would bring. The quiet student would not stay quiet forever.